What's going on, everyone? This is our project on light switches. So why did we choose light switches? Well, our group wanted to focus on an object that all college students use on a daily basis and put very little thought into using them. We chose to do something very simple because members of our group recognized that previously when trying to redesign a website or app, the scope of the project would get too big and become very overwhelming very quickly. With that being said, the main purpose of a light switch is to turn lights on and turn lights off. However, diving deeper, we were able to find some core problems that warrant a redesign. So, what are the core issues? Well, our group, when we were brainstorming the issues with light switches, the first thing that came up was sometimes that you can have multiple switches for the same light. This proves to be problematic, especially with generic on off switches. This you can see in the bottom picture. The switch is labeled on when it's up and labeled off when it's down. This is because the culture norm is that up is on and down is off. So there are going to be times where the switch is on and up, but the light is actually off. This problem is amplified even more when you have a panel of switches, as you can see in the top picture. Most interviewees were unable to successfully map out every switch. Therefore, you could have a situation where you're trying to turn on a particular light and have tried every switch that is up or quote unquote on, and only to find out that the correct switch to turn off the specified light is actually down and needs to be pushed up. Additionally, we quickly realized that light switches do not provide any feedback if they're working or not. More specifically, if you're using light switch to turn the light on and it wasn't working, you're unable to tell if the issue is with the light switch or the light bulb. Furthermore, when conducting our interviews, we found out that common complaints was not having an ability to adjust the brightness of the light. Sometimes there are instances where it's midday and it's bright outside, but it's barely bright enough inside to read. By not having the ability to adjust the brightness of the light, the user is forced to have the light on inside, outputting a maximum brightness and thus using more power and preventing the user from enjoying the light from outside. We found that most users do not think critically about the issues that they have light switches, but instead choose to accept them.
When conducting our interviews, we divided them into 3 segments: pre-task, during, and post-task. The pre-task questions help us get a feeling for the setting that our interviewees are in. The second portion of the interview had questions which were made out more about the user's interactions with their light switches. This section gave us concrete data involving errors and light switches, since we had the users complete a task which told us if the light switches were well designed. The final section of the interview, the post-task, was included in order to allow the interviewees to reflect on their light switches. In this section, the users gave us insights regarding their perspective on light switches. This helped our group in creating a redesign. We used the master and apprentice model in order to allow for the interviewee to give their own unique perspective on the design. Some information we had gained from interviews was that the typical problem people have with their light switches is the mapping. On a panel with multiple light switches, they did not really know which light did what without testing it out to find out. Another interesting point to note is that most of the interviewees preferred to have a dimming feature on their light switch in order to control the brightness of the lights in a given room.
Hey, this is Elmar, and I'm here to discuss our error analysis. So once we sorted through our data, we saw that we had 3 errors that users accounted for. The first one was mapping related. A lot of light switches were clustered or poorly ordered for the lights they corresponded to. Our interviewee suffered the most was remembering which light switch corresponded to which light, due to poor placement and a lack of clear signifiers. This was an example of a description similarity error where the user acted upon an item similar to the target. Next, we saw a mode error slip that occurred when a light had 2 or more switches. What ended up happening is that by turning on one of the switches, the light would turn on, but the other switch would remain in the off position while the light was on, causing confusion for the user. Next, we saw a memory lapse slip where the user would forget to turn off all the lights before they leave the house or go to bed. This was due to a lack of a clear indicator that the lights need to be turned off. So in conclusion, the biggest takeaway we had was that we needed to prioritize solving the mapping problem. This is because while the other 2 issues were important, they only affected one person each. The mapping problem affected many people. Current light switches are often generic and intentionally similar enough that it is hard to tell which one it corresponds to which light. And we would need to build a new light switch to account for this.
For light switches with simplicity in the on and off function, as in there's only one capability, which is on and off, the complexity for mapping is lost because of that limited capacity. However, because it is limited, it's very simple to use and very easy to understand. And the signifiers are that you can only turn it up or down, and it correlates with on or off. For light switches that are connected to ceiling fans, the centralized location enables ease of access, but because a height limitation necessary in order to reach the string connected to the ceiling fan, being for short people or disabled people, it is a trade-off. Light switches in a panel, the capability and closeness of the location means that complexity of the mapping can be lost due to some of the lights not working or some of the lights being connected to other parts of the house, such as the heating rather than the lights.
For patterns and trends, a pattern that we discovered from our data was that 9 out of 19 people were unable to demonstrate their mapping abilities on turning on the right light switch to the correct light. So for this experiment, we basically asked the people we were interviewing to turn on the right light switch for the correct light located in their kitchen or living room. So almost half of the people were unable to complete this task, and so we realized that this was a common slip happening in our project. For trends, a trend we saw was that people would prefer a simple light switch compared to modern switches used today, such as LED screens and Alexa. 7 out of 19 people would have preferred a simple light switch design, while only 3 out of 19 people preferred a modern light switch. The other 9 people didn't really have a preference, but they were leaning towards a simple light switch design too. So as old technology is the current trend happening today, when it comes to light switches, people would prefer keeping a simple design. And this information would be helpful when it comes to our redesign process.
So we chose the 5 most distinct switches that we ran into during our interviews and ranked each based on their simplicity and versatility. We found that the switch that only contains the slider ranks the highest overall in the design space because, unlike the other switches shown here, it ranks high in both simplicity and versatility. This is important because we concluded that the ideal light switch should be designed in such a way that ranks it high in both simplicity and versatility. For our redesign, we decided to use the slider-only switch shown above as a foundation for our redesign, while adding features from the switch that contains both a button and a slider shown below, as we found that it contains useful features. The result is a switch that has the simplicity of the slider-only switch, but also contains useful features such as the addition of an LED light that indicates whether the switch is on or off, and an icon that signifies that the light that the switch is controlling. These 2 added features improve the switch's versatility because in situations where a user is in a dark room, the LED will guide them to where the switch is, and the icons on top of the switch remove the user's obligation to memorize which switch controls which light, as they can simply refer to the icon and be more confident in which switch they are controlling. That being said, this is where we feel like our redesigned switch falls in the design space, because it has the simplicity of the slider-only switch, while also having the versatility of the switch that has both a button and a slider.